Man, Daft Punk. What a legacy these guys have made. I mean, I know that everybody has different music tastes when it comes to whatever interests them, but even if you don't know what electronic music is, you must know Daft Punk. They're considered to be pioneers and revolutionary artists in terms of what they've done for electronic music. It's not even funny. And today we're going to take a look at what made them so unique to the eyes of many. Now bear in mind that I'm only going to be covering Daft Punk's main discography, that being their 4 studio albums, a few key singles from them, and a few other projects they were a part of. I'm not going to talk about any of their remix albums or the Tron Legacy score, mostly because most of those albums are redundant and because I have zero knowledge or interest in anything Tron related. So yeah, without further ado, let's move along. Daft Punk is made up of 2 of the finest electronic musicians to come from France, Thomas Bangalter and Guy-Manuel de Ronem Christo. And yes, their names do sound awesome because that's how you pronounce them in French, especially Thomas. In English we call it Thomas, but here it's Thomas. Born in the mid-70s, these guys met at the Lycée Carnot School in 1987 and discovered that they had very similar interests, mainly in regards to film and music from the 60s and 70s. And being young teenagers who wanted to get involved with music, they ended up doing what every kid their age tries to do, started up an indie rock band. Indeed, they formed the trio Darlin with Laurent Bronkowitz. It didn't last very long, and it was critically savaged by a British magazine that dismissed them as a bunch of daft punky thrash. Instead of taking it personally like most people do nowadays, though, Thomas and Guy-Manuel actually found the review to be pretty damn funny, and decided to swap out their guitars and drums for synthesizers and drum machines instead. Meanwhile, Laurent Bronkowitz ended up joining a different, slightly lesser-known indie pop band called Phoenix. Well, I can't really say lesser known because I'm pretty sure everyone's listened to this. It's 20 seconds till the last call. You're going in. Classic. Anyways, now that they were a duo and had rechristened themselves under a new name, it was time for them to start releasing singles to promote an album. They recorded a few random demos and songs, a good many of which would end up making their debut album in 1997. That album was...
The sound of tomorrow, the music of today, brings you exclusively Daft Punk's Homework.
This album was a huge deal even before it splashed down, as the singles that Daft Punk were releasing at the time were getting a lot of attention. A lot. So much attention that it actually led to a bidding war between labels that caused Guy-Manuel and Thomas to leave their current label, Soma, for Virgin Records. Honestly not a bad move, since that label had signed the likes of Genesis, Simple Minds, Janet Jackson, and Lenny Kravitz. They also made sure that, unlike a lot of young musicians that signed with a record label, Daft Punk's music wasn't limited by any outside forces. No bullshit contracts, no studio mandates, nothing. They made exactly what they wanted to every time they went to the studio without any limitations. So yeah, it was clear that they were taken very seriously by the music industry. But why exactly is that? Well, let's take a gander from the perspective of someone in 1995 who bought one of their first hit singles, Da Funk, to see what it was these 2 French teenagers could do. It's kinda repetitive, but it's somehow not that obnoxious. It's just something about that bass. Yeah, okay, I dig this. I totally dig this. And so did everyone else who heard it, but can you blame them? This is 5 minutes and 28 seconds of pure dopalicious Chicago house music. Jesus Christ, I just used the word dopalicious unironically. Yes, it's a stiff beat. Yes, it's repetitive as hell. But when you hear those drums, that bass, that synth line, and especially that funky acid house riff, you just don't care. It's something you just gotta headbang to. And this song would be the basis for really all the singles that came with this album, because that's really what this album is, and it's why it's even named Homework in the first place. It's a collection of singles that Guy Manuel and Thomas just threw together in their bedroom with no extra help and released it as an album. If you think about it, these guys literally were the first bedroom producers, and they didn't have our fancy schmancy Abletons or Logic Pro X's to assist them. It's all just electronic music that they bought and recorded stuff with. And the quality of their songs is really good too. I already mentioned Da Funk, but the other singles released to promote this album, Around the World, Burnin', Indo Silver Club, and Revolution 909, are just some really fun club songs. There's nothing fancy about them, or the other non-single tracks on this record, but they certainly aren't all cookie-cutter like modern electro houses, and they all have a uniqueness to them that makes you remember them. Rollin' and Scratchin' has that really hard synth riff, Fresh has that introductory guitar tone and ocean samples, High Fidelity has the chattery saxophone samples that contrast surprisingly well with the click-like drum beat, and Burnin' has that groovy bass line. Heck, there's even one song, Teachers, that's just Guy Manuel and Thomas listing some of the musicians that inspired them.
Paul Johnson, DJ Funk, DJ Sneak, DJ Rush.
I guess if making your debut album is considered homework, then it only makes sense that your teachers are house DJs and producers, primarily from the Chicago area. Most of these guys aren't super well known to general audiences, but some noteworthy names include Joey Beltram, DJ Pierre, Little Louis Vega, and Todd Edwards, the last of which would actually work with Thomas and Guy Manuel in the near future. There's also some big name musicians that they name drop like Brian Wilson, George Clinton, and Dr. Dre, all of which are critically acclaimed in their own right. I guess you could say that Dre's a teacher nowadays, but I'm too lazy to pay for a masterclass. Daft Punk themselves could be considered teachers in their own right. Homework's release was met with high critical acclaim, and it really brought house music up to the forefront in electronic music. Most review scores from magazine and online music critics tend to be pretty high as well. Sounds like a case of first installment wins, right? Well, allow for Discovery to introduce itself. This record is noticeably much different from the album before it, shifting away from the Chicago house that Guy Manuel and Thomas had been influenced by, and adding some more R&B, funk, and most importantly disco elements to the sound of Daft Punk. Part of the reason for this huge shift was because of Homework's huge international success. Because, as we all know in the rule of music, the moment something different becomes super successful, the more people will jump onto that bandwagon to make a name for themselves, regardless of how much talent they actually have. Daft Punk recognized this and decided to incorporate different musical elements into their music to stay distinct. Which is honestly really respectable, especially in this day and age where every electronic pop song sounds identical to each other. Speaking of staying distinct, I should also mention that it was around this time that Daft Punk decided to properly introduce themselves as robots. One taller silver robot that represented Thomas, and one shorter gold robot that represented Guy Manuel. According to both of them, the reason for Daft Punk's sudden switch into cybernetics was because of an explosion in their studio that transformed them into their new personas while they were working on a sampler. In truth, though, it was actually because of two reasons. One is that they felt that as DJs and producers, they wanted to simulate rave parties where the person DJing or producing really isn't all that important, and it's the experience of listening to the music that you're there for. On the one hand, that makes sense, especially now that every DJ event in the world has some big-ass poster with their face on it like they're channeling their inner Big Brother is watching you or some crap. On the other hand, I'm pretty sure this idea backfired, since Daft Punk are now the most recognizable electronic musicians of all time. I mean, you literally can't make it any easier for people to notice you once you turn into robots. But that didn't seem to bother Guy Manuel and Thomas all that much, since their new personas were the ones getting all the attention and not what was under the robot helmets. Because under the robot helmets, they were very camera shy. Even during the release of Homework, they were pretty reclusive during press junkets, and starting with Discovery's release, they refused to let anyone see their true faces. In fact, the only images I could find of their real selves were as sculptures made for the sole purpose of showing what they actually looked like, and a still of a 2013 Facebook post that got taken down when the duo requested it, and I'm not going to show it here to honor that request. Anyways, onto the album itself. As I mentioned earlier, Discovery is a very big departure from the sounds of Homework, and I mean that in the most sincere way. Unlike Homework, which was just a bunch of club music slapped together into an album, Discovery is a concept album. Namely, it's about Thomas and Guy Manuel's childhood memories of the mid 70s and mid 80s, growing up watching movies, and generally just composing in a free flow, childlike way. And you can tell that they're having a lot of fun with this record with tracks like Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, Superheroes, and Aerodynamic. Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger definitely feels like it was written by a kid in some aspects. I mean, looping a singular phrase and manipulating it over time? That's totally what kids in this day and age do now. The only difference now is that we have memes. But what also makes this record fun is how many great melodies the songs have. Homework might have had a few fun tunes to hum over the thumping kicks and bass, but even tracks like Phoenix got very blocky and repetitive after a while. We do get some repetitiveness in High Life, Crescendos, and especially Superheroes and Too Long, but we also get tracks like Digital Love, Voyager, and Face to Face, which all feel rather dramatic and have multiple layers to them. There's also some moments on the record where Daft Punk slow things down for more emotional moments, such as on Night Vision, Veridis Quo, and Something About Us. Something About Us in particular really hits the feels in some areas. This album is also significantly more liberal in its sample usage. Some musicians Daft Punk lifted stuff from included the likes of Little Richard, Electric Light Orchestra, the Alan Parsons Project, and even Barry Manilow. Considering that there had been a massive crackdown on sampling in the previous decade, it's pretty impressive how Daft Punk got to take elements of music from such big names in 2001. Although there are some rumors that some of these samples are fake to skirt around copyright laws, so take that what you will. I should also mention that the anime Interstella 5555, the 5 Tori of 5 Ikrit 5 Tar 5 Yistum, was released 2 years after Discovery as a visual companion to the album. Basically, every song on the album has its own animated music video that connects to this big story told through the album, or something to that extent. It was supervised by a man named Leiji Matsumoto, who's apparently a very famous creator in the world of manga and anime, and was an idol of Daft Punk's in their childhood. I have barely watched anything related to anime, so I can't comment on this too much, but it is still pretty neat that Daft Punk got to work with their childhood hero to some extent. Interstellar 5555 is definitely impressive from an animation standpoint, but I'll admit it doesn't really do anything for me on a visual medium towards music videos in general, so don't take my word for it. With or without Interstellar way too many fives though, Discovery has definitely made a lasting impact worldwide, and it was clear that nobody was going to be ignoring Daft Punk anytime soon. Which is why it's more than a little odd that they seem to drop the ball on their next project.